Now, as heavy fighting between government forces and the M23 rebels escalated in Eastern DRC this week, attempts to restore peace will resume today in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Now, former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is the facilitator of the East African community-led talks, visited Goma after talks in the Congolese capital, Kinshasa, on Monday. He also spoke to Rwandan leader Paul Kagame on the need for M23 rebels to cease fire and withdraw from the captured territories. The United Nations has reported that the latest fighting has so far displaced over 200,000 people. Now, to discuss this, we're joined on the line by Ras Advocate Sipho Mantula, researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Advocate Mantula, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Jambo Africa, Sita Sakina, even to our viewers across the continent, including the Eastern DRC, the troubled Goma and South Kivu and the surrounding areas.
Now, the leaders of DRC and Rwanda will be meeting in Nairobi. But is it clear at this stage, Advocate Mantula, whether the M23 rebel leaders will be part of these talks?
You know, Sita Sakina, it is not clear in the sense that even when the East Africa community met last week, when they said that there will be these peace talks, there was no clarity about who will be the representative of these talks. As you are aware that we have what we call shuttle and megaphone diplomacy that we saw happening over this past weekend. Both President of Angola, President of Kenya being in DRC today, engaging with Felix Tshisekedi, not knowing who's going to Kenya to engage with the facilitator Uhuru Kenyatta. So it is important for us to understand who are the faces and the voices of these talks and what time frame are they looking at, because agency and challenges on the ground affects those countries. But I think also, Sister Sakina, if one has to go further, we need to understand dynamics of this conflict of the Eastern DRC, the geopolitical, the economy also of the neighboring countries that has been part of. And you ask yourself, for SADC being led by DRC, why there is a silence even of the Troika? Rather, we see the AU-led process, the East Africa community-led process, as well as the UN process. And that's where you get even the so-called witnesses being foreign countries becoming observers in these talks.
And it has been going on for quite some time. But before we look at the nuances of the geopolitical impact here, can we just establish of what value these talks would be if the M23 rebels are not part of those mediated talks?
Very important aspect that you are raising, because the value and the end result is for the, what we say, the DDR process. How do you demobilize? How do you disarm the many rebel groups that are in the DRC? I think, again, we need to move beyond M23, as it is almost 10 years, M23 being very active in the Eastern DRC. But there are many other rebel groups from your Ituri region, from your Bunia region, from Beni. So there are many regions in the Eastern DRC that have been contesting this conflict. But like you say, what then is the outcome of these talks? Like I said earlier, Uhuru Kenyatta engaging Kagame on Friday, and seemingly that the M23 or M23 will cease to attack. But yesterday also there were reports of attacks just outside Goma in one of the villages called Rutshuru. So if you ask yourself, Mr. Sakina, are they genuine, these talks? Because what I've picked up from the ordinary Congolese, it seems that they are not optimistic about these peace talks that are beginning today, but they are very pessimistic about what is needed is the army and those regional forces to deal with the rebels that are in the Eastern DRC, which becomes the M23, which has been active. So one can look at that. Does the regional peacekeeping force going to replace many UN peacekeeping missions that have been in the Eastern DRC since 1960?
So perhaps it's worth reminding ourselves what exactly is at the heart of this conflict.
At the heart of the conflict is what DRC says, that Rwanda is supporting the M23 rebels. Also, Kigali accusing DRC to be supporting FDLR. But let me add also, Uganda has an interest in this conflict also, that is also fighting on the borderlines with the other allied forces that they are alleging that there are other rebel groups. So one can look at the conflict in the DRC, Sakina, for the past 6 decades. Others will say, but go back to 1990. The conflict has been around what I said earlier, the geopolitical, the economy, the natural resources that are there, the armed groups that have never been demobilized into the national army. Despite that M23 in 2013, they signed a peace deal. It means that they reneged on it in 2021 when there was nothing, that they were claiming that Tshisekedi has left them out in the army integration. So if one looks at what is at the heart of this conflict also, like I've said, it is the appetite of the neighboring countries on the natural resources, including even us, South Africa, that when we held the talks in 2001 of the inter-Congolese dialogue, we had an appetite and an interest in the natural resources of the DRC.
By the way, what is South Africa's interest in the natural resources of DRC? Is it more state interest, or is it more private entity interest?
I think they are dual. They're both state and they're both private. And also, as me and you, we are struggling with the load shedding. Remember the Inga Dam that we have collapsed on dealing with the Inga Dam, the hydropower with the DRC. South Africa played a critical role in the post-conflict reconstruction development of the DRC. And our state also has been the relationship between South Africa and the DRC, which has been sour at some point. If you look at the electoral projects, if you look at the business, but the main challenge has been, how do we manage the DRC, which is so rich, but it has been looted by the Western countries and also by its neighboring countries. South Africa can still play a positive role in the DRC process, but it needs to avoid even the issues of corrupt deals that are always going between private and government. Hence, you find Tshisekedi has been trying to push some of the multinational companies that had more than lifetime deals, including Kabila too, as a former president. He has been given immunity in these processes. So, in short, I think our foreign policy, Sakina, in the DRC must also be informed by the SADC mandate. How do we restore peace in the Eastern DRC?
So you mentioned Rwanda, and Rwanda has often denied any sort of involvement in the DRC conflict, and this despite, ferocious accusations by Kinshasa. Yeah. Now, is Rwanda in any way, shape, involved directly or clandestinely in what is happening with the rebels?
Interesting question also that Rwanda, if you look at its national interest in the Eastern DRC, yes, it has denied these accusations, but also look at the Rwanda's role in the DRC conflict since 1994. After the Rwanda genocide, one must understand that Rwanda is jealously guarding its borders, is also pursuing what we call regional interest. We find Rwanda in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, where there is oil. You find that Rwanda also in the Eastern DRC. It will tell you about its national sovereignty. It will tell you about its national economic interest. So if one looks at the role of Rwanda, it has been going to and fro in terms of whether are they operating overtly or covertly. But experience said more, even when we look back in how South Africa also had a diplomatic row with Rwanda on some of its military soldiers who were dying here. Also, you look back at what happened between Rwanda and the DRC last month, recalling of their embassy representative, Ambassador Karega, who was part of South Africa at some point, embassy here. They were already showing a diplomatic lack of trust among themselves. So if one has to look at the role of Rwanda, Sakina, it is that they are always silently quiet on many issues, but they have also played a negative role in these atrocities in the Eastern DRC to be taking so long. Because what is at stake again here is the humanitarian catastrophe, but also the looting of the natural resources that we must never forget.
So just finally, we have the Angolan President João Lourenço, who will be joined in these mediation talks by Kenya's ex-president Uhuru Kenyatta. So what new does Kenyatta bring to the table in these talks, and how widely has he consulted before tomorrow's peace talks? Do we know?
No, we know. Sakina, remember Kenyatta before he gave power to William Ruto, the East Africa community 3 months ago, through his leadership in that East Africa, agreed that they need to have a regional force to deal with the situation in the Eastern DRC. Lorenzo from Angola, he's the current chair of the Great Lakes region, and he has been seized with this mediation for some time. Also, Angola is looking at its economic national interest on this conflict in terms of mediation. So everybody doesn't come for a free lunch or a free dinner or a free supper. They have something that they are looking at. So both Lorenzo and Uhuru Kenyatta, they are bringing a knowledge. And remember, Lorenzo, as a former defense minister, engaged with Kagame at some point in this conflict. So it is very critical when you look at the two roles of these mediators. Only that we can foresee what will Uhuru Kenyatta bring, because William Ruto, as we are speaking, is engaging with Tshisekedi this morning. So one looks at Kenya is playing this role, Burundi, the South Sudan, Tanzania, unlikely, but Angola also plays the parallel role in this mediation talk. So let's hope these peace talks will bring social justice to the ordinary people of the DRC, because they are the ones who are enduring this suffering. It is beyond these talks, Sister Sakina, that we can talk about them, but will they bring social justice? Will they bring development in the Eastern DRC?
And even before that, are you hopeful that there will be progress during these talks? And what will it take to silence the guns here?
Definitely. I'm very optimistic, hopeful as an African mind person who has been in conflict resolution space. I'm very mindful. And yes, silencing the guns, it is important, but silencing the minds also in the Eastern DRC and in the region is what Africa must achieve or must strive for. So one is optimistic, one is hopeful that these talks will bear fruit as we know them as Nairobi and Rwanda mechanisms. So these two processes must bear fruit to the ordinary people, and the media will urge them to constantly monitor and follow up on these peace talks so that they don't just become mere peace talks, but there is still conflict going on the ground.
Well, thanks so much for that. And of course, we hope to follow up as well. That was Ras Advocate Sipho Mantula, researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs.